So I'm really loving this 14-inch laptop space because there are some really good products on the market right now. The MacBook Pro 14 if you want something that's catered towards creators and designers. There's the Blade 14, the G14, both amazing gaming laptops. There's also the X14 by Alienware, but we don't touch that one. It's no bueno compared to these two. If we're talking about design and build quality, personally, I think the Blade 14 is built better. Like, this is entirely aluminum, even on the bottom. It just feels super solid compared to the G14. You have plastic bits on the bottom, which takes away from the appeal. Don't get me wrong, it still feels very premium, but there's just this allure to the Blade 14 that the G14 doesn't have. They both weigh about the same, slightly heavier with the Blade, but the G14 is a bit thicker, and because it's using that 16:10 aspect ratio, the laptop itself is deeper. Now, to me, the little things are important, and one thing you'll notice if you have both laptops is that the hinge on the Blade 14 is way tighter. Like, it just feels nice and strong. You open up the display, there's very little wobble to it, whereas the G14 tends to wobble a bit more. It's not bad, it's not a major concern, but there's a difference between these two laptops. The other thing is when you close it, and again, this is a little thing, not a big deal to most, but when you close the G14, this is what it sounds like. When you close the Blade 14, that's what it sounds like. It really reminds me of how you close a MacBook Pro, and the sound of it is less than most other laptops. Again, stupid because you can simply just close your laptop very slowly and never hear it, but some of you out there are pretty aggressive when you close the displays, and the Blade 14 does sound quieter. Ports are almost identical. They both have two USB-A ports, two USB Type-C ports, HDMI 2.1 ports. You have the audio jack. The only difference is that the G14 comes with a micro SD card slot if you want to insert external storage. The other thing I prefer with the Blade is that the ports are at the back side of the laptop compared to the front side of the laptop like they have on the G14. Their vents happen to be at the back, so cables are going to be closer to you rather than further away. Ideally, in the perfect world, I'd love to have all the ports on the back, but it's obviously not capable with this style of design. But the one area that the G14 starts to win out on is ergonomics. For one, it uses the ergo hinge, so airflow is better. Two, it has a better keyboard. Like, typing on this guy, ASUS is doing such a great job with their keyboards. They just feel so comfortable to type on. Big keycaps. The Blade 14, don't get me wrong, it's a good typing experience. It's just not my favorite. The one thing that the Blade 14 does better though is RGB. The per key RGB on this guy, way better than the RGB on the G14. It's just hard to see on the white model, and because the font they're using, it just doesn't light up as bright, even on the darker version. Also, if you do decide to go on the white model, I still suggest you go black. There's a green tint on the keys, and it's not the same color or same paint job as the deck of the keyboard. Even though both laptops have forward-facing speakers, and I do appreciate the laser cut design they're now using on the Blade, they just sound better on the G14. They get louder, they have more bass, there's more depth to the sound. Even with THX enabled and spatial audio and all that stuff on the Blade, the sound quality is just very flat. Like, it just doesn't sound that great. They both have webcams. The Blade got updated to 1080p. They both support Windows Hello, 720p on the G14, but quite frankly, they both still look pretty awful. So here's another example of the hinge. If I tilt these displays back, the Razer Blade is going to stay, whereas the G14 won't, because the hinge on it is not nearly as strong as the Blade. Again, not a big deal, but I still want to point it out. The displays themselves are both QHD or QHD Plus with the G14. They both have identical color gamut, but the G14 does get brighter. So if you're working outdoors a lot, you're probably going to prefer the G14 display a bit more. Now, performance is what you guys really came here for, because they're kind of similar in some ways, but different when it comes to the GPU. You buy the G14, you're getting the RX 6800S. You're buying the Blade 14, you can top it up to a 3080 Ti. My model here only has a 3070 Ti, so GPU-wise, it's technically not fair, but you'll see that this 3070 Ti performs very well compared to the 6800S. Now, CPU performance is interesting because this is using the 6900HX, and you'd expect that to run faster since it's technically an unlocked CPU which can have more power pushed to it compared to the HS that's inside of the G14. But with multi-core speeds, the G14 was faster. And same holds true with single-core clock speeds. If you are doing anything that remotely involves creative work, it really comes down to the specific application you're using. With Photoshop and After Effects, this 6800S outperformed the 3070 Ti. I'd imagine the 3080 Ti would push back. If you're talking about Adobe Premiere Pro, then the Blade 14 performed better than the G14. I also did a DaVinci Resolve test because I personally use DaVinci Resolve. I stopped using Premiere a long time ago, and the Blade 14 slightly outperforms the G14, but the difference is negligible. Now, because ASUS pushes their CPUs a little bit hotter for longer, the Mozilla FireFox compile test was 7 minutes faster on the G14 compared to the Blade 14. So if you're a developer, because of that 16:10 display and the faster clock speeds, this will give you better compile times. But if you're using Blender, don't even look at a laptop with an AMD GPU. So the TGP of both gaming laptops are almost identical. The 6800S runs up to 105 watts compared to 100 watts with the RTX 3070 Ti. Power bricks are pretty much identical in size. The Blade's power brick is a little bit taller, whereas the ASUS version is a tiny bit wider. This is a 240 watt power brick compared to 230 watts. Now, if you're gaming at 1920 by 1200 or 1920 by 1080 on the Blade, the 6800S does beat out the 3070 Ti. I don't think it'd beat out the 3080 Ti, but it does beat out the 3070 Ti due to the faster single core clock speeds. And of course, it can push those CPU speeds higher for longer because that's just the way this thing is tuned. But as soon as you switch it to QHD, okay, which I imagine most of you will be gaming at QHD since these are QHD displays, the 3070 Ti outperforms the 6800S. So thermals are where things get very interesting. The G14 tends to run a bit hotter, and with that you do get better performance, whereas the Blade 14 is more conservative. It doesn't like being in the 90s for too long. It'll drop down into the 80s, and with that you get a cooler experience. There's some advantages and disadvantages to this. The G14 will always be the better performer in terms of the CPU. Like, this is an HS processor beating out an HX processor. But longevity-wise, I feel like the Blade 14 has the advantage because it's taking the safe approach. You also get way quieter fans with the Blade 14. I know it doesn't look like it's way quieter in this graph, but trust me, every decibel makes a difference on your ears, and the Blade 14 does a better job with it. Now, both laptops have a mux switch, but it does require a restart if you're switching between the integrated and dedicated GPU. Vapor chamber coolers, bigger on the Blade, but I do appreciate the little details that ASUS is doing with the design. Swappable NVMe SSDs, but the read and write speeds are way better on the Blade. This is not a Gen 4 drive, and if it is, it's a very slow one. RAM soldered onto the motherboard. The most you can get with the Blade is 16 gigabytes. The G14 either has 8 or 16 soldered on, depending on the model you buy, but you do get one slot that is upgradable. So my model has 32. Battery life, way better on the G14. It's just a bigger battery, 76 watt hours compared to 61, under 10 hours compared to under 6. So here's the thing. I really love the Blade 14. I personally think it has a better design, build quality, and look. But the thing that's giving me a tough time recommending it right now is the price difference between both of these laptops. Like, this is a $2,600 laptop with a 3070 Ti compared to the G14 that has the 6800S, the fastest GPU they offer for it, that costs $1,899 if it was to come with 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's an $800 difference. I don't think the Blade 14 with its soldered on memory and worse battery life is worth $800 more. If I had to choose between these two, and I was someone who traveled a lot, but also loved to game, and I wanted really good battery life, it's a no-brainer. It's the G14. If things were more equal in price, then I could suggest the Blade 14 for certain situations. Maybe if all you were doing is gaming. Maybe if you were gaming and doing a bit of 3D work, then the NVIDIA cards make a lot more sense. And with that, you get better fan noise. But as of right now, because of the price difference, it's a no-brainer. The G14 makes a lot more sense today. I hope that answered all of your questions. If you have any more, let me know in the comment section down below. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.